Well, welcome back to the shed after a long absence. Well, as you can see, I'm not actually in the shed, I'm in our office. Um, and I just thought I'd update you on some of the reasons why there haven't been any videos for a while. I guess, like many people building a model railway, you get to a certain point where you realise that things have not quite gone as you'd hoped. And certainly that's the case for me. Um, Just to give you a bit of background, I started building my railway right at the beginning of the COVID lockdowns, and that caused quite a lot of problems. Couldn't get track components, couldn't get uh, trains, vehicles, rolling stock that I wanted, couldn't get Digitrax controllers. It was quite a nightmare getting the components you needed to build the railway. So yeah, I made a few mistakes, and some of those were down to that absence of equipment. So one of the first things I think I've learned from it is that when you lay track, you really need to get all the stock running around it. You need to make sure that everything works, doesn't derail, before you put ballast and things around it, or in my case, cover it up with another level. And a little bit later in this video, I'll be going and actually having a look at some of the problem areas and just showing you some of the challenges I've got to try and solve them. So another thing I think I learnt was don't make it too complex. One of the things I was trying to do is pack an awful lot in, and as I was building it, realised that actually 00 gauge trains are big. The length of a train is quite significant. The curves you need to allow for are quite generous, and if you try and squeeze too much in, well, you just can't get it all in and it doesn't work very well. So problems with curvature, we're right on the limits for some of the stock, some of the locos. And because I was trying to pack it all in into quite short spaces, got some quite steep gradients. Well, they're not a problem, but the change of gradient at the top or bottom is, particularly if you've got a coach and its bogies are a little bit stiff. There's a tendency for a wheel to pop off as it goes over a rise or goes up a changing gradient. And that's made even worse when you combine it with a curve at the top as well, or bottom. So I learned a lot of lessons there. Not quite sure how I'm going to solve all of those. I'll show you some of the problems in a few minutes. Another thing was not really thinking about how the railway was going to be operated, and because it sort of developed a little bit as I went along, sort of perhaps put in some complexity, some connections from the main terminus to the storage sidings, which were not really needed perhaps, and also drove me erroneously to arrange the storage sidings perhaps in the wrong way. It would have been better if I'd arranged them so that the continuous run went through all of the storage sidings rather than just one of them. So that was another thing. What else? Well, I had a few problems with some vehicles, and I've still got some problems. I've got one problem with a coach. It appears that the NEM pocket is a little bit lower than the other NEM pockets on other vehicles. What that means, of course, is that it's dragging the coach behind down a bit, twisting the bogie, and that tends to lead towards derailments. It also means that if you put hunt couplings in, which I've tried, it actually, because they are quite strong, it actually is twisting the bogie on the other coach, or the one that's where the coupling's low, so it's lifting it up off the track, so it derails a lot. So just tried going back to the old hook and loop couplings. Luckily I did keep them all. And yeah, they're a bit better, but it's got a problem. It tends to uncouple because the couplings are not working properly. So that's something got to look at. I think it's just one coach. Need to have a look and see whether I can adjust something on the coupling assembly to get it a little bit better. Also had some problems with some wagons, some quite light wagons, and again, problem was that the couplings are not sort of sprung sideways, so on reasonably sharp curves, and particularly with a bit of vertical curve added in, couldn't get them to stay on the track. Tried a variation of couplings and a bit of attacking them with the Dremel, and it's not really worked, so that's a bit of a disaster. Scenery wise, that went reasonably well. There's some places where really don't really like how I've done the static grass. I got a little bit too clever with it, or I thought I was being clever, but actually it looks pretty naff. So there's some areas that I might clear off when I get round to it. But the scenery actually I was pleasantly surprised with the scenery, how that went. There's one girder bridge that I scratch built, and actually I think need to look at the decking of that. It wasn't as strong or good as it could have been, and that's one of the derailment areas, so that's something to look into. Yeah, as I say, I think the big learning point is just the size of things, and probably you know, having more time to lay everything out on the baseboards, to perhaps run some trains around on it before screwing or sticking or nailing or whatever everything down. That might have helped. It would have helped to get a bit more clearance between boards vertically, so you can actually get in to do something. That's now a problem. If a point motor on an upper board fails, I've got a real struggle to get in and remove it or work on it. So that's something else I've learnt about. We'll have a look at some of those challenges. Yeah, and oh, just a silly thing. I thought I'd made the terminal station goods yard quite interesting with some sidings, a little runaround facility, including a turntable. Don't know why. I don't really think I needed it. That probably was a bad idea, but it looked okay, nice. And then discovered that actually you couldn't run a freight train of anything more than about 4 wagons, because I got nowhere to marshal it ready to depart, other than the station platforms, and nowhere to receive it back. So I had to do a little bit of work on extending one of the sidings to provide a bit more space so that you can actually run a train that looks a little bit more realistic. So yeah, those are some of the experiences, and we'll go and have a look at the railway and have a look at some of the features I've just been talking about. So let's start with the main terminus, and as you can see, it's got 4 platforms. But one of the things I didn't really realise was just how long a double O gauge train is. You can see in the nearest platform behind the goods shed we have the Class 20, and we've got 2 Mark 1 coaches, and that just about leaves room to have perhaps one more coach in the platform and still be able to put a loco on the other end of the train. So that is something that really quite surprised me. I should have known really, but if you actually want to run real length trains, you need a lot of space. And as I mentioned in the introduction bit, the goods yard here, originally the third siding ended at the end of the goods shed here, roughly where I'm pointing, and that meant that effectively I could get about 4 wagons and a locomotive between the buffer stop, which was here, and the set of points here. Really didn't make much of a goods train. It was alright if it was the 08 shunter, as you can see, with its 3 coaches and a brake van, but if you wanted to use anything bigger, then it didn't really make sense. So having added in a bit of track there, and now you can get a reasonable length goods train. So the terminus area actually was quite pleased with. However, as I said, the platforms take a lot of space, and so does the actual throat area. The ability to get 4 tracks together, to route them and to feed them out onto the main line, room for the goods facility, Yes, I've got the turntable so I can keep some locomotives on the tracks here. The turntable also provides a little run round facility for the freight trains, so you can actually use the turntable as part of the run round facility. So it sort of worked, but a bit more space would have been helpful. Now what about the lower level underneath the terminus? Well, originally this was going to be a single track reversing loop, effectively just a dumbbell end, but in a rash moment when building it, I decided to make it a double track with a double junction and hidden underneath. So let's try and see if we can get in there and see where that is. And you can just about make it out in under there. It's not the best place to have a junction, to be honest. If anything happens, it's really hard to get in to see what's going on. Got two sets of points and a diamond crossing. Linked in, of course, with it being a reversing, means that you've also got the insulated joints so that the polarity change system can work. And what you can't probably see very well is I made a slight error at the far side where, let's see if I can get it in over here. We're in this time over there actually ended up with a little reverse curve. I'll put one of the pictures in when I compile the video. That will help to show it. But that reverse curve has caused me a bit of grief with one of the coaches. So the next area to have a look at is the storage sidings underneath, and here I did make a mistake. Trying to get enough length in was difficult, even going all the way across the shed with the sharpest curves I dared at the ends, and of course I also made the layout wrong. I really should have thought about how I was going to use these before designing and building them, and because what I have done is made the three sidings on each side, there's 6 in total, connect primarily up to the terminus station, up through the bank and down the line at the far side. And that's not really how I found that I'm using the railway, so that was a mistake. And as you can probably see, this set of points here is actually on the start of the gradient in order to keep the gradient sensible, and it's on a curve. Not a good place. So with hindsight, this little bit here would have been much simpler if I'd got rid of the 2 lines going down to the storage sidings, just had everything going up onto the top level, and in fact then I wouldn't have needed it to go up. I could have had it flat and given myself more room underneath the terminus to access the loop at the bottom. So this particular bridge is one where, with hindsight again, isn't hindsight that wonderful thing? I would have done it differently. I made the girders myself out of plasticard, and I made the deck out of plasticard as well. That was a mistake. I really should have used some thin ply to give it a bit more rigidity. It's been a nightmare with it being flexing, particularly in the warm weather, and that has meant that with it being on a curve, it's been a derailment hotspot. What I would say for this board is that the scenery has worked reasonably well. I'm quite pleased with it. The rock faces, the bridges, the retaining walls, the canal, all have worked rather well. The only thing probably could have done better is the static grass, where I tried to put too many colours in and probably should have put a little bit less in. I do need to look at making some longer static grass areas, perhaps some sort of gorse or similar on those to make it a bit more of a heathland, and that would help. Okay, so one of the areas I've been having trouble with is the coaches and derailments, particularly on the vertical curves. They were okay for a while, and then I started going through systematically checking each coach and each coach in combination, and discovered that there seems to be one rogue vehicle. So we're going to try the class 20, which is sitting in the station, and we're going to run it up the bank
and round past the windmill, and that's one of the areas I've been having a problem, so we'll see how that goes. And the problem we've been having is right at the top of the bank, just where the 20 is now. And of course this time it went round perfectly, but it is in the reverse formation. So whilst it managed to get over the top of the bank from the terminus, this way round tends to derail at the reverse curve underneath the terminus baseboard. Let's see if we can get it to do it. Well, not the easiest to see, we'll see what we can do. So it starts off and into the tunnel, we go underneath. Just got to listen for it. There we go, you can hear so we'll see how it goes on back round the curves into the terminus, see if we have any problems. It seemed to stay on this track there, so we'll just route it back into the terminus, and then we'll try running it in the opposite formation, opposite direction, and see how that performs. Okay, so let's try running it in the opposite direction. So I haven't turned the coaches, just put the Loco on the other end, and we'll see whether this one gets over the bank. And of course this time it managed it. So let's see how it progresses around. And now of course it's underneath in the storage sidings. Let it run all the way around. You can't see it, I can just about make it out. Oh, it's now dropping down into the low level. And it will emerge underneath the terminus in a second. And back round underneath the terminus to that reverse curve that's causing the grief. And wait and listen, see if we hit. Yep, we have a derailment. Okay, so that was the leading bogie of the front coach derailed. We'll see now if we can get it to go back and go around, have a look and see if we can see any other problem areas, or whether it is just that rogue coach. So it should be coming into the storage sidings in a moment. make it out under there. Runs through. And emerges to climb back up round to the terminus. So far so good. Okay, and that seemed to be okay. And just as I said it was okay, the back coach uncoupled itself on the reverse, on the vertical curve there. So I have to have a look at that. Now this shot here of the locomotive coupled to the coach, you can see that the two couplings are just about the same level and both hooks are engaged. If however we move to the middle between the two coaches, not sure whether you can, how well you can see it, but this coach here is a good millimetre lower than the other coach. The actual coupling droops down at the ends, and that appears to be common to both ends of that particular vehicle. I don't know whether it's a fault on the vehicle, but because they're not level, it does mean that they don't couple. So if I just uncouple it, you can see there that the two couplings are a completely different levels, so they don't engage properly, and that also means as you go over vertical curves, sometimes they just lift out, they don't hook in as right. So that's something you need to have a look at. It does appear to be that there is a problem.